Aloha, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of SCEP Live Online, a production of University of Hawaii Presents, based at the University of Hawaii at Mānoa Outreach College. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Hawaii State Foundation on Culture and the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, the University of Hawaii, and Kainoa Senior Services. We're excited to have you join us this week, and we love to stay in touch. So give us your comments and questions through today's chat window and let us know what you're thinking. Also, if you send your email to csinfo@hawaii.edu, you'll get notices about upcoming programs. Today, we have a very special program for you, The Classics Come to Life, a 4-part series analyzing the classics and their connections to life today. And we're extremely lucky to have with us to take us on this journey, Professor Daniel Harris-McCoy. Harris-McCoy is Associate Professor and Head of Classics at the University of Hawaii at Mānoa, where he teaches courses on a wide range of topics relating to ancient Greece and Rome. In his research, he has studied Greco-Roman literature, intellectual history, dreams and divination, and the reception of classical culture in modern society. He won the UH Chancellor's Citation for Meritorious Teaching in 2017. So without further ado, let's welcome to SCEP Live Online, Professor Daniel Harris-McCoy.
Wow, well, thank you so much, Tim, for your extremely kind introduction, and greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. I really appreciate it. I can't see you out there, but I can feel your presence, and I look forward to being with you tonight and discussing some really great stuff. Bear with me for 1 second. I'm going to get myself organized and share a screen, and I'll get my notes in front of me too, and then we can all be on the same page, so to speak. So, sorry, 1 second, guys. A little embarrassing because I know that we rehearsed it. Okay, I think that we should be good to go now. So I want to start with a couple apologies. I first want to apologize for my voice. It turns out that when we take our masks off, we start getting common colds. And even though I'm over my common cold, I lost my voice. And so, usually I have a nice sonorous voice, but today you're getting, something a little bit less than. I also want to apologize for not being able to do this in person in something like the style of a book club. I would be really thrilled to someday in the future be sitting in a circle with all of you guys with books in hand. I have mine here, and just talk about Homer like we do in my classes at UH. It's really those classes that were the inspiration for this talk. I find it so exciting talking with my students, whether they're 20-somethings or if it's my Kapuna students, sometimes 80-somethings. And the energy that we create talking about this ancient literature and its meaningfulness and relevance to our lives is just so palpable and inspiring. And I see students of every age grow over the course of the semester, or if they become a classics major, their time with me. And so, the goal of what we're doing here is basically to bring that to the community. And so I want to give thanks to Tim Slaughter and also Lucia Aranda, who's my department head, who proposed this idea that I work through SCEP and have a conversation with you guys about the power of the classics. And as Tim said in his introduction, this is going to be a 4-part thing. Today we're talking about Homer, trauma, and healing, a wonderful subject that's near to my heart. Sooner than later, in the subsequent weeks, we're going to be talking about Sophocles, we're going to talk about Plato, and we're finishing up with Stoicism, which has really experienced an amazing resurgence in recent years. So anyway, without further ado, let's begin. And in spite of my voice, I am going to do a little singing in Greek. And it's not the first time that I've done this when I've lost my voice. So we're going to get through it together and get ready for a little bit of sung Greek. This is the first line of Homer's Iliad. And you can do so much with this line. So let's unpack it a little bit together. Okay, here I go, about to embarrass myself. Menin a edethea pele I ajau Achilleos. If you enjoyed that and you want to hear it one more time, here it is. Menin a edethea pele I ajau Achilleos. Okay. And I've given you guys the Greek in case you want to try and parse out the ancient Greek. It is related to the Roman script and then to our Roman script. And I've given you translations in Greek word orders and in English word order, translation as well. Okay, so we can all kind of be on the same page with the language. One of the things that you probably noticed is that I sung rather than spoke the thing. That might not be the right most accurate way to talk about that. Basically, what I was trying to get across is that ancient Greek language up to a certain point in the first millennium AD had a pitch accent, right? That is to say, it's tonal. So if anybody has Chinese speaking learning experience, right? Not dissimilar, right? Certain Greek words, certain Greek sounds would rise or fall or rise and fall in the same sound, right? And that's reflected in the different accents that you see in the screen shared first line there. Okay. The other thing that I want to tell you guys about ancient Greek language is that it has a very flexible word order, right? English word order basically determines sense in a sentence, right? Not so in Greek. You basically change certain parts of nouns and adjectives and verbs and stuff like that. And that gives you a sense of how everything is connected. And that's one of the most wonderful things about studying Greek, which you can do right here at UH Mānoa, by the way, little plug. So when you're looking at something in the original, you can really see how the poet is able to, or the prose author is able to emphasize certain kinds of things, and that's going to be very important for how we think about the most important themes that Homer is developing in his poem, the Iliad. The next thing that I wanted to remind you guys of, as you were sort of listening to my piece, remember that it had a metrical quality. Right? And ancient Greek and also Latin meters, right? They're quantitative. They're like quarter notes and eighth notes, right? It's like reading music. It's not like in English where it's more of like a stress-based kind of thing, okay? And the particular meter that you see in epic, it's called dactylic hexameter. And I'm not gonna go into a big thing about how that works, except for to say that it's kind of this never-ending bum ba ba 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 bum bum, right? Over and over and over. This is the meter of epic, right? So it felt epic. To me, when I listen to it, I feel like I hear armies on the march, right? I feel like grand things are taking place. The other thing that I would say is that to the Greek ear, dactylic hexameter apparently sounded swift, right? It was a fast meter. It wasn't like casual, day-to-day you and me type of conversation. It was something where if we want to get through long texts together and make it feel like it's moving along, dactylic hexameter is what you want to use. And so it's a good meter for epic, okay? The other thing, and I guess the final thing that I want to say about this first line before we sort of get into our particular themes that we're going to talk about is that Homer and the Iliad reflect something called oral formulaic or formulaic composition. Okay, it's not like you and I, when we go and write something down and we're doing it on a writing tablet or on our computer or whatever, and we can take time away and come back to it and stuff. Basically, people like Homer and the tradition that he represents, right, is an oral tradition, right? It was passed down from teacher to student and performed in different contexts, sometimes contests, different kinds of festivals, religious traditions. but it was an oral thing for centuries done without the aid of writing, okay? And then at some point it was written down, maybe in the 8th century BCE, maybe in the 7th century BCE, right? But realize that Homer, if he even existed, right, he's probably made up, frankly, all the evidence points to it. He's just the tip of the iceberg for something that is much broader and much deeper, okay? And I find this so exciting because when I'm reading, Athenian tragedy, right, which is coming a few centuries later, I know precisely in what context it was written and by whom, and something about their biography and the historical events that it's representing. But when I'm reading Homer's Iliad, right, and Homer's Odyssey and Hesiod's Theogony and Hesiod's Works and Days and other, ancient Greek works that represent this oral tradition, right, what they are talking about is not quite timeless, but it's getting close to it, right? And it's not quite universal, but it's more universal than, ancient Athens or ancient Sparta in a particular year in, the midst of a particular set of historical events. Do you see what I'm saying, right? So what we're talking about today is bigger than any one person. Some guy named Homer may or may not have written it down, right? But it's much bigger than that. Okay, let's move on. I didn't show you this slide yet, but this is Dactylic Hexameter, written out for anybody out there who knows and loves music. It's basically some combination of the A and the B, right? The quarter and the eighth notes, or the 2 quarter notes, times 6. That's what dactylic hexameter means. Okay. Now, let's go back to that theme of rage that we were talking about. That theme of rage that we were talking about. Remember that Homer's word order is flexible, and so he's able to put the words first that he wants to emphasize most. And I can tell you from lots of experience reading Greek literature in Greek, right, that first word in that first line, like I was talking about, is so important, right, because they have the benefit of being able to, front load what they want. And Homer's first word of the first book, of the first line of his Iliad, is meinin, right? That means rage. I've put it there in the Greek in red, and you can spot it there. That sounds a little crazy if you start an English sentence with rage. And so what this pretty liberal translator, whom I love, his name is Stanley Lombardo. He's an emeritus classics professor from the University of Kansas, and also a certified Zen master. So that's a little piece of information. He insists on putting rage there first because of that importance, right? That's the first word. That's what Homer wants us to recognize as his most important theme. So he puts it there in big, bold letters. And I've given you a screenshot from the first page of his translation, which is what I'm going to be using for the rest of the night here, okay? So this first line is rage. Sing, goddess, Achilles Rage, Achilles, who's the son of Peleus. Stanley Lombardo leaves that part out for the sake of brevity and swiftness in the beginning of his translation, okay? Now, this makes some sense that Homer would be interested in rage, as a major theme in this text, and it's in fact going to be the rage of Achilles that we are going to be exploring for the rest of our evening together. Homer is the first, author, first example of Greek literature that we get. So, obviously I can't kind of draw on predecessors to sort of talk about the importance of issues of rage and anger. But one thing that I can tell you for sure is that a lot of subsequent Greek energy, Greek cultural energy, was spent contemplating anger as a mental state, right? And the Greeks were aware that it happened, right? That people sometimes got angry and sometimes got murderously angry. And they wanted to think about that fact and explain it and frankly, try and deal with it somehow, right? And that makes sense, right? If anger is something that can take people over in destructive ways, then we'd better try and understand it and deal with it as a civilization if we don't want to destroy ourselves fairly quickly. So for example, I think, of the tragedies of Aeschylus. These came out in Athens in the mid 5th century BCE. People have heard of the Oresteia, right? It's basically kind of rage passed down from generation to generation, which has the potential to destroy a house and potentially a whole city, right? And so Aeschylus is kind of thinking about how we as a society deal with this anger, right? Or we think about the psychological model developed by Plato, where things like appetite or anger, right, can go really wrong. And they're sort of antithetical to the best parts of us, the most philosophical parts of us. And so he spends, frankly, the bulk of the Republic trying to think about managing that psychology, right? And tamping down the very emotions that, ancient Greek heroes like Achilles were very, very prone to. Okay? So the question then, and I just love this cartoon, is what is all the fuss about? Why is Achilles so angry? What's the sort of situation that we're dealing with over the course of the 24 books of Homer's Iliad that have selected rage as this theme? Basically, the quick and dirty backstory is this. The Homer's Iliad, the Trojan War is a 10-year war. Homer's Iliad, right, even though it's the grandest epic of them all, deals only with a very, very short portion of that. We're in the final year of the war. The Greeks have been slogging it out against the Trojans, trying to get Helen, you might have heard of her, back. She's been taken off to Troy by Paris, and the Greek armies under the command of Agamemnon in particular, and also his brother Menelaus, who is Helen's jilted husband, they've been fighting for 9+ years now, trying to get her back with all of the other Greeks, or Achaeans, they're called different things, trying to get her back with those guys in support. Okay? Now, as part of the sort of perpetual warfare and sacking and besieging, people take different kinds of war prizes when they engage in siege and sacks. And some of these war prizes are women, right? Female war prizes that might be concubines, right? Or slaves, or both, okay? And Agamemnon happened to take a war prize named Chryseis, right? A woman as a war prize named Chryseis. Achilles had taken as a war prize a woman named Briseis, okay? Now, it just so happened that Chryseis is the daughter of a powerful priest of Apollo. And so her dad is upset, right, that the daughter has been stolen away. And so he prays to Apollo and he sends a plague down. Right, he sends a plague down. And it's killing the Greek army left, right, and center. Achilles and some others figure out why this is happening. And so he says, Agamemnon, being the good commander that you are, you really need to give Chryseis back. Right? You really need to give Chryseis back, okay? And Agamemnon is upset. He says, heck no, I'm not going to do it, right? And Achilles is like, no, you really, really got to do it. He says, fine, I'm going to do it, but you've humiliated me in front of everybody, so I'm going to steal your girl. I'm going to steal Briseis, okay? And this is super upsetting for Achilles. And basically, he almost kills his commander on the spot. Instead, what he actually does, because Athena tells him to do it, is he leaves the war. He retreats to his camp, right? He exits the battlefield, and all of a sudden, things start going very badly for the Greeks. Long story short, Achilles' best comrade in arms, his name is Patroclus, is killed. Achilles goes berserk, right, and starts committing all sorts of horrible war crimes. It's really a terrifying portrait in something akin to insanity. I will soon relate it to combat trauma and what we now call PTSD. And eventually, Achilles kills in his rage Hector, who is the son of King Priam of Troy. He's the preeminent Trojan hero. Even that doesn't satisfy him, and it's really only at the end that Achilles is able to sort of come back into sanity when he's visited by the totally distraught King Priam of Troy, and they share this very powerful moment of grief together. Okay, so why is this so upsetting to Achilles to have his woman Briseis taken away from him? Okay, this is a complicated thing. I don't want to say anything sort of offhand, but basically, women as war prizes, they were sort of interchangeable at one level, right? They were available. Achilles talks about how back at home he could have a pick of wives, right? So it's not to do with the woman per se, right? Or at least that's how scholars typically think about it. Really, it has more to do with the Greek concept of honor. And I want to kind of talk through this with you guys. And the way that I talk about the heroic honor system is in terms of these three terms, right? The three terms that I'm going to introduce you to are arte, kleos, and time. That's how you pronounce those things, right? And let's imagine them as a kind of series of actions and consequences culminating in social currency or honor, right? But it's really part of the same system or even economy, if you want to sort of, state it in those kind of, financial terms before there were things like, hard currency and finances and stuff, right? So it begins with arte, which is an act of excellence, right? This is a Greek word that's related to like our aristocracy, for example. Okay, so you can do acts of excellence, acts of arte, in all sorts of different contexts, right? You could be politically excellent, rhetorically excellent. Athletics was a really great way to show your excellence, but probably, at least within, kind of Homeric heroic culture, the battlefield was where it's at, right? So if you shine on the battlefield, right, obviously you're putting your life on the line, which is a valuable thing for your community, and people can see it and they're impressed by it, and it probably means that you have the gods behind you, right? And so that means that you're something special. And that specialness is something that was acknowledged, right? That is part of this honor economy that I've been talking about. And that recognition or renown, right, we call kleos. People think, they're not 100% sure, but they think that this relates to the Greek word kluein, which literally means to hear, right? So you're not just doing stuff, right, but people are hearing about it. And that's important. We'll talk about the kind of implications of that in a second. And once you've done well, once you've done your act of excellence, and once you have been recognized for it, you've had your kleos, you've had your renown, then you get your time, right? You get your honor, you get your social currency. I think that, frankly, in some ways, given our own social media likes and dislikes, how many subscribers world that we live in, right? In some ways, maybe social currency is the most up-to-date translation of something like this, right? And in a certain sense, this translates to something like real currency. That is to say, you can gain tangible benefits from proceeding successfully through this cycle. Okay, so it's not just that people like see you and clap you on the back, right? But you get things like like expedient marriages, right? People will want to marry their daughters to you. They'll want to give you positions of power. They'll give you objects, right? Gift objects that are tradable and giftable, right? And that will allow you to create new social connections and new alliances. And the list can go on. They'll give you property, right? Once Agamemnon realizes the error of his ways and he wants to bring Achilles back into his good graces, he says, you can have my pick of daughters and I'm going to give you 7 cities, right? How crazy is that, right? So, even though this is kind of like pre-hard currency in a certain sense, right? And a little bit abstract, right? At another level, it couldn't be more concrete, okay? And frankly, that is why Achilles is so upset, okay? The system that he has bought into and put his life on the line for, right? He's literally putting his life in peril. And at some level, he knows that he's probably or actually going to die, given his presence at Troy and his pursuit of honor. He wants to make sure that this system remains intact, right, for all of the good benefits that it's going to provide him with. And so when Agamemnon disrupts it, right, by taking his prize and humiliating him, right, taking away his teammate, taking away his kleos in front of the rest of the Greek troops, then basically his world has been turned upside down, and it is very, very upsetting. And it explains, exactly why Homer would have chosen this theme of Manus, this theme of rage, to basically flesh out the subsequent 24 books of the Iliad. Now, I want to sort of expand a bit. I've given the Greek context for how we can think about Achilles' anger, but now I want to give something like a modern or even a universal, right? A kind of transcendental, in a way for thinking about Achilles' experience, right? His humiliation, his dishonoring on the battlefield, and what it causes him to do subsequently before he experiences this healing moment. And for that, we turn to the work of Jonathan Shay. His importance to our field really can't be overstated for reasons that I'll talk about a little bit further down the line. But here he is, the great man, the benevolent man. Here's the book that I would point you all to if you want to read more about it. Maybe some of you have heard about it, seen it already. It's called Achilles in Vietnam, Combat Trauma and the Undoing of Character. Let me emphasize, Jonathan Shay is a psychiatrist, okay? He worked for the VA in my former neighborhood at a big VA hospital, Veterans Hospital, in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts, which is basically a kind of suburb of the city of Boston. And that's where he did his work. And he had no idea that he was basically going to make this the work of his lifetime, and that he was going to find these incredible, sort of connections to the classical world that were going to allow him to develop a model for how combat stress or combat trauma, he calls it a couple different things. We might call it PTSD. He was going to sort of use this comparative connection between Homer and then his own experiences working with actual veterans, mostly Vietnam, some first Gulf War, some first Iraq War veterans as well, to develop this really influential model for PTSD and how it works and how to heal from it. Okay, and he won, for what it's worth, a MacArthur Genius Grant for his work, among lots of other prizes in his field. And he's been really influential in classics and injected a lot of energy and interest into the work that I do. So I'm very grateful to him, and all of my colleagues are grateful to him. Okay, so what I'm working from here is a 1991 article that Shay came up with that basically talks about, kind of how combat trauma works, PTSD works, its trajectory, right? Both in terms of its causes and also its symptoms, what you can kind of expect along the way. And, like I was saying, he sees all of this in Achilles' experience. And, I'm going to draw on what he says as I'm sort of going through Homer and working with this model. And then, in Achilles in Vietnam, and also this sort of initial article that I'm working with here, he's also seeing parallels in the Vietnam veterans that he was working with. And I'll give you just one example that maybe we can connect to Achilles, in case you're interested in. But what he says here, and this is a quote from Shay himself, he says, Vietnam veterans with severe PTSD often report the following combat experiences: a leader's betrayal of what's right, some sort of ethical violation. Also, blunted responsiveness to any emotional, social, or ethical claims outside a tiny circle of combat-proven comrades. Grief and guilt for deaths in this circle. Okay, that's another thing that I want to emphasize because it's going to be relevant to our conversation. Lust for revenge, renunciation of ever returning home, seeing oneself as already dead, berserking, right? This kind of feeling of godlike invulnerability, sometimes going onto the battlefield, almost like without armor, and thinking that you're not going to be able to be killed. Dishonoring the enemy, desecration of bodies, and a loss of humanity. Okay, a different way of thinking about this is that PTSD or combat stress or trauma begin with a violation of the ethical norms that belong to the community, and then a subsequent retreat by the person who feels like these norms have been violated, right, into a state of isolation and kind of a disconnection from communitarian or human norms, right? So, a sort of feeling of alienation from the right way to engage in war, right? Concern for fellow soldiers beyond that very sort of limited set of comrades that I was listing as part of Shay's quote. Desecration of the enemy, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. One thing, just to emphasize as well, this isn't just kind of like shell shock, right? Perhaps experiencing violence has something to do with PTSD, but Shay really emphasizes the ethical aspect of it, right? Or sort of being caught up in the unethical aspect of it, right? And the consequences. So that's something to sort of bring out here. Okay. And he gives an example of a betrayal of what's right in Vietnam. I don't want to sort of belabor us by going through the whole quote, but he gives this crazy example of a squadron in Vietnam where basically the squadron had run out of water, right? And they were literally dying of dehydration out in the field as they were getting shot at. And this commander from afar, he's like, okay, fine, I'll send you some refreshment. And he basically kind of like aerially bombed his troops with crates of tab, and some people were actually seriously injured. These people were being maimed by airborne bombs of a diet soft drink from the skies, right? And this, among other things, right, was this particular informant's sort of explanation for why the Vietnam War experience was so detrimental to them, right? It was dealing with, nonsense like this, these sort of, violations of competency and basic, sort of decency from one's commanders, in addition to, the basic fact of putting one's life on the line, right, that made him, fall into this state of despair. And maybe to add insult to injury, right, this major who bombed the squadron with the tab, they put in for the Bronze Star and they got it, right? So upsetting, right? This sort of idea of injustice and incompetence everywhere. Okay, so we can sort of see, when the ethics of the honor system are violated by Agamemnon, right? Achilles is humiliated in front of everyone. We can see why Achilles might fly into this rage. Given both my explanation of the importance of the honor system and Shay's model, that begins to explain PTSD in terms of the violation of what's right, as Shay phrases it. And we can look at Achilles' rage at his commander Agamemnon in the ways in which the cultural fabric, right, the fabric of norms in Greek society and the army begin to unravel. Okay, so Achilles looks Agamemnon up and down, and he starts saying things like this: "You sorry profiteering excuse for a commander? How are you going to get any Greek warrior to follow you into battle again? You know I don't have any quarrel with the Trojans. They didn't do anything to make me fight. It's for you, dogface." Isn't that a funny insult? "For your precious pleasure and Menelaus' honor that we came here, a fact you don't have the decency to mention." Right? So we could unpack this at length. The things that I want just to say quickly, right? Achilles is beginning to kind of see things all too clearly, right? These societal norms that he bought into just moments ago, he's starting to be repulsed by and he wants to retreat from, okay? The commander frontline soldier relationship, okay? Wars need generals and they need, privates. They need frontline fighters like Achilles. But now Achilles is beginning to, feel like the game is rigged, right? Agamemnon's only here for his precious pleasure. It's Achilles that's needing to sweat this out and risk his neck on the battlefield, right? How is Agamemnon going to expect people to follow him into battle, right? He's not just a general who hangs back, right? But he does it for selfish purposes, right? The unraveling has begun here, okay? We can see through Homer the narrator a little bit of insight into Achilles' emotional state. Achilles' chest was a rough knot of pain twisting round his heart. Should he draw the sharp sword that hung by his thigh, scatter the ranks and gut Agamemnon, or control his temper, repress his rage? In fact, Achilles seems like he probably would have killed Agamemnon, right? the killing of a superior officer, except that the goddess Athena comes down and tells him to insult his commander instead. But one thing I will tell you is that other Greek literature, subsequent Greek literature, is aware of the phenomenon of inferior troops killing their commanders, or at least sort of exploring that concept. And I'm thinking in particular of Sophocles' Ajax, which we're going to look at somewhat in the subsequent weeks of this series. And he's someone who actually made the attempt, failed attempt, but he actually made the attempt to kill the Greek leaders. So that's something that was on the Greek collective mind as well. Instead, Achilles engages in these insults. He tore into Agamemnon again. "You bloated drunk with a dog's eyes and a rabbit's heart. You've never had the guts to buckle on armor in battle or come out with the best fighting Greeks on any campaign." I just love this stuff. You could probably write whole articles about what it means to tell your commander that he's a bloated drunk with dog's eyes and a rabbit heart. But in any case, it's that kind of emotion, the direction of insult and emotion that Achilles chooses to go in. All right. What he does next is anticipated or reflected, depending on how you want to think about it, by Shay's model. Basically, Achilles goes into his particular camp, right? His group of ships. It's the Myrmidons is what they're called, aka the Phthians. They're from a certain part of northwestern Greece, right? So he really only wants to hang out with his particular countrymen. It's that kind of withdrawal from the broader Achaean or Greek society represented by its army down to a really smaller, more restricted number of combat-tested friends, right, other veterans. And one thing that's really interesting to note is that when Achilles engages in this withdrawal, he participates in a lot of kind of like unexpected, very domestic activities, okay? So he's not kind of doing what I imagine Greek troops are kind of doing in their day-to-day sword fighting practice, or feasting or slapping each other on the back or something like that. Instead, he's having quiet dinner parties with his friends, right? This is an interesting thing, right? Very small number of people. He's playing the lyre quietly to himself and singing, little songs to himself, right? And as he's sitting in this restricted space, right, this domestic space of withdrawal, right, due to this initial humiliation, Greeks come to get him back. These are friends of his, right? But outside of his particular group of people, the Phthians, right? And they have things to say. They have different ways that they want to try and get Achilles to return to the war, because things are not going well for the Greeks without their preeminent hero. Odysseus, you might have heard of him, speaks first. He talks about the shame of leaving friends to die. He also offers massive bribery, right, on behalf of Agamemnon. I'm going to give you all sorts of treasure if you come back. Phoenix, who kind of shows up in Achilles' city, but he's not actually, kind of his particular, city stock. He kind of plays the proxy father figure, and he plays that card. He talks about how gods and heroes relent. And then Ajax, who's basically the second best hero, he says, screw all of this. Achilles has a hard nature. His soul is an icy scab, is what he says. He insults Achilles in this shady kind of way that I think is meant to shame him into relenting. Or else he's actually disgusted, but it's a little bit hard to tell. And so this leaves us with the question, why don't these entreaties work, right? These are real, things, where they're speaking to real values in ancient Greek society, right? Ancient Greeks responded to shame. They responded to bribery to a certain extent, right? Fathers, or proxy fathers were meaningful to them. They respected, the model of the gods. They respected the model of other previous heroes, right, from previous and greater generations. So for some reason, for some strange reason, this doesn't work in the case of Achilles. And if we return to Shay, What Shay would say, based on his experience reading Homer's Iliad, but also working with, actual combat veterans, is that, the combat veteran who has experienced combat trauma, PTSD, basically no longer speaks the language of his community, right? He's alienated from it. He feels resentment towards it, right? Somebody needs to speak a different language, right? That the combat veteran is still responsive to, right? And these guys are coming in and they're sort of, beating over Achilles over the head with their cultural values and, being patronizing to a certain extent. And he says, I love you guys, but I want nothing to do with this. Please go away, right? And he doesn't care all that much that the Greeks go on dying, okay? As I said before, his world is restricted to a tiny circle of combat friends, specifically the Myrmidons or Phthians, right? They're the people from his hometown. And in particular, a person named Patroclus, right? Maybe you've heard of him as well. He is, somebody that he grew up with, that he feels a powerful bond with. Obviously, they've gone to war together. And in fact, their bond is so powerful that it led, future writers, I'm thinking of Plato in the Symposium in particular, to, say that they were lovers and that it was obvious. Homer doesn't say that explicitly, but it feels real to me when I read the text like that. That seems like a real potential there. Okay, so it's really Achilles and Patroclus in some ways that are the last people left on Earth as far as Achilles is concerned. And Achilles says this amazing thing. He says, "O Patroclus, I wish to Father Zeus and to Athena and Apollo that all of them, Greeks and Trojans alike, every last man on Troy's dusty plain, were dead, and only you and I were left to rip Ilion down stone by sacred stone." Isn't that crazy? I feel like that's something that like a modern, kind of dark, but, modern pop singer might write or something like that. But this was written almost 3,000 years ago, right? He wishes the world was sort of like an apocalyptic moonscape made up of only him and Patroclus, right? That's his wish. That's how far Achilles has withdrawn from the rest of society. Well, you can imagine Patroclus goes out to fight wearing Achilles' armor. That's an interesting thing. You can imagine that when Patroclus, of course, inevitably, tragically, is killed by Hector, right, the greatest of the Trojan heroes, as I mentioned before, this has a catastrophic effect on Achilles' psyche. He was destroyed before, right, due to the humiliation, but now he's really destroyed. Okay, he talks about a death wish. You can see that from the quote that I have up here on the screen now. He talks about a death wish. He talks about the guilt that he feels when he was no help to him when he was killed out there. He talks about the sort of loneliness and fragility of Patroclus. He died far from home and he needed me to protect him, right? That's an interesting way to phrase their relationship now. He goes on from there, okay? The other thing that Achilles does as well is goes into a state of, kind of a berserk. He commits what would basically be war crimes. There wasn't really, martial law is probably not the right way to phrase it, but you know what I'm trying to say, right? There's not kind of like formal law, but he's basically violating every norm of the battlefield that he can. He's killing people left, right, and center. He's, killing people, or he's capturing people for human sacrifices to Patroclus. That was a huge no-no in ancient Greek society. He clogs up a river, which is also a god, with the corpses of the dead as a sort of, religious and environmental violation. And he also desecrates Hector's body after he kills Hector in his wrath. One thing I should emphasize is that the killing of Hector is not actually satisfying, right? It's not actually satisfying. And maybe to try and find some satisfaction that remains elusive, he pierces the tendons of Hector's ankles and drags him around behind his chariot. And the other Greeks, out of sort of relief for Hector's death, also get to stab Hector's body with their spears and make fun of him. It's a little bit of shades of like Somalia and Black Hawk Down, if people remember that. Okay. So, as I was suggesting before, right, the embassy to Achilles, right, Odysseus, Phoenix, and Ajax, they were not effective in bringing Achilles back to the war and back to the sort of larger Greek community, nor was killing the killer of his beloved Patroclus satisfying, right? Achilles is still in a very, very black place. What seems to do it is a nighttime secret visit by King Priam of Troy, right? This is the now very aged, children and grandchildren, king of Troy. And he comes and he is begging Achilles for the body of his son back, for the body of Hector back, okay? And what he says is, King Priam of Troy speaks, "Respect the god, Achilles, think of your own father and pity me. I am more pitiable. I have borne what no man who has walked this earth has ever yet borne. I have kissed the hands of the man who killed my son." This is so powerful. I mean, I feel myself getting slightly emotional, even though I've read this 1,000 times and I feel, the chills going through my body. I really mean that. And yet it's a funny thing. What he is saying here at some level repeats what the embassy said, right? Odysseus, is offering him rewards. Priam is offering him rewards, right? He comes with gold and treasure and stuff, right? They talk about respecting the gods and, one's fellows, right? That's something that the ambassador said, and that's something that Priam is saying too. So what's the difference, right? What's the difference? What Shay says, and this is a screenshot from that original article, to me, Priam embodies the spirit that caregivers need to enter the frozen waste that some Vietnam combat veterans inhabit, to invite them back into the warmth of a human community. So that leads us to the question, on what level can Priam relate to Achilles? Well, basically when I ask my students this, what they immediately and intuitively say, and I'm sure that they're right, is that he's the enemy, and he is someone who has experienced, like Achilles, incredible suffering that frankly very few other people can understand, right? And so it's not theology, it's not shame, it's not, issues of honor, right? That's going to get Achilles to begin to be able to soften and relate to his fellow human beings again, right? It's fellow suffering. And somehow that's the attitude that we need to sort of invoke, right? A willingness to listen, right? To grieve together, to feel that compassion, right? Which literally is Latin for suffering together, right? And that's going to begin to build the bonds that are going to be able to take people who have been traumatized to take a beginning step, a baby step out of their trauma. I just want to say quickly, Shay's work, right, which I've been talking about, and work with the Iliad in particular. He also wrote a book called Odysseus in America, which I like a little bit less, but it talks about veterans' experiences after their homecomings. It's very interesting as well. This really has re-energized the field of classics, which is my home field. There's been a renaissance in outreach by classicists, and to an extent advocacy for veterans. So I was actually part of an outreach prize committee that awarded a prize to a Dartmouth professor who was doing reading groups in her local libraries with veterans. And there are versions of this that have taken place across the country. Some have a theatrical flavor. There's things like the Theater of War or the Aquila Theater in Boston and New York, respectively. So that's been an important part of our field. More generally, right, classicists are always looking for relevance. That's something that I'm trying to do as part of the series. And this makes what we do timely, right? It was through, dialogic work with Homer and also with combat veterans that Shay was able to come up with his theory and talk about it as profoundly as he does. So This has made our field feel a little bit more meaningful in today's day and age. And then it's also part of a broader trend in classics to engage with pressing issues. So post 9/11 and dealing with returning veterans and trying to sort of find a humanistic way of engaging with that issue. That's one thing. Of course, race and gender with Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement. That's kind of the next step that we're going through now, as well as a field. So with that, I will stop. I've spoken for long enough. I'm very grateful to your attention, and I wish you well, and I hope to see you back next week, same time, same place. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, Dan. That was very illuminating and very enjoyable listening to it, and really, really connected with a lot of things that we think about and look at today. You talked about Homer may have been fictitious. Is that certain? I didn't realize Homer was not real.
Isn't that funny thing, Tim? You and I are so used to looking at this book and it says the essential Homer. There it is, right? It's right there. This is a really great, slightly abridged version of the Iliad and the Odyssey. I would recommend it to anybody. By the way, just a little plug for that. I had nothing to do with it, but I do like using it. We're so familiar with having a name, and publisher and etc. associated with our texts. And frankly, the Greeks were too, after a certain point, right? Literacy maybe happens. I mean, they had very early, forms of literacy, maybe like in the, 12th and, even a little bit before centuries BCE. But like literacy kind of became a widespread thing, like from the 6th century BCE onwards. And, as they were sort of like dealing with, nameless poems that maybe represented this bigger tradition, the oral tradition, they felt comfortable with that. And so what they like to do is give, authors as well as biographies to this stuff. So what I think happened was, they came up with the name Homer somehow, and they came up with this idea that he was a blind poet from Chios. And we see versions of these kinds of like fake biographies all the time. There are blind poets they show up in the Odyssey. And so I have a strong feeling that people were like, oh, a blind poet in the Odyssey. Well, Homer must have been blind, right? He must have been talking about himself at some level. So that's kind of how that tends to work. And you see it all the time. Even people like Virgil that we like know, a little bit more about them. People make all sorts of nonsense about him based on his poems. So that's kind of how that works.
Oh, I see. But I can keep my Homer T-shirt, right?
Oh, yeah. And I encourage you to wear it as much as possible, please.
Okay, will do. When the whole correlation with the with that Shay made with the PTSD, that was very interesting too, and how connected that back to the classics.
Yeah.
When was that exactly again?
So that's interesting. That was 1991, and I think he kind of came up with it on his own. This guy, I mean, he's a super brilliant dude, and Harvard undergrad and BA, and PhD or MD from somewhere else crazy, right? So like, the brilliant mind is there for sure, but it wasn't like he partnered with some classicist and like came up with all of this stuff, right? He did it on his own. And what he did was he reached out to this really famous Harvard classicist who's basically like down the street, right, over in Cambridge, right? Greg Naj is his name. And he's a famous Homerist. And Shay was like, hey, why don't you look at this comparison I'm doing? And, Naj is amazing and like is one of the most important Homerists there is. But I have a strong feeling that his jaw probably hit the floor when he saw this, because it's just so unusual for classicists to be willing to think in these directions. You know what I'm saying? Like we're much more comfortable kind of like playing little linguistic word games and, rare allusions and stuff like that. Right? So to do something that is so profound and yet so rigorous at some level, maybe there are little problems with Shay, right? I could probably think about it and kind of tease it out. But this is for real, right? And so they partnered up, and Achilles in Vietnam, the book, right, the book length version was published in 1994. And I think it was famous right away. but it became really famous after 9/11, right? Because, there was a certain amount of combat veterans that were coming back, from the first Persian Gulf War, which was the timing for that.
Right.
There were a hell of a lot coming back from, Iraq too and Afghanistan,
Yeah.
right? And so it really
Wow.
got a kind of second good reading there.
Yeah, those comparisons are amazing. Well, thank you for being with us this evening. I really appreciate your putting in a whole day of teaching and then working with us in the evening as well. And I want to thank our sponsors once again for being part of producing all of this. That's the Hawaii State Foundation of Culture and the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, the University of Hawaii, and Kānoa Senior Services, and you, our audiences who come to our programs. I want to mention a few things that we do have coming up on Skep Live Online. Tomorrow night, we have a jazz concert at 7 p.m. with Abe Lagrimas Jr. and friends. That'll be at 7 p.m. Live stream from Orvis Auditorium here on campus. Then next week, Tuesday, June 8th at 10 a.m., we have a performance artist, Rob Faust, performing with Mask in the Mask Messenger. And then Wednesday, June 9th at 10 a.m., we have shakuhachi master Christopher Blasdell performing with the shakuhachi, of course. And then be back here next week, Thursday at 6:30, as Professor Harris-McCoy will talk about Socrates on the Art of Love. And that's at 6:30 next week, Thursday the 10th. So thank you, Dan. Thank you for being with us. And we look forward to the rest of the series during the rest of the month of June. So stay safe, everyone, and aloha.
Thank you so much.